Hi, I'm Andrew Wallace, and welcome to the We've Got a Problem podcast, where each week we explore inspiring stories of struggles, success, and solutions to prevalent problems and how our guests have turned a problem into an opportunity. This week I'm talking to Chris Redmile, a UK-based behavioral change management consultant for a Big Four consulting firm who also works as a performance and productivity coach, helping people overcome their limitations, solve problems, and understand what they're truly capable of. Now, Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me, and that's a lovely introduction. I'm not sure who that guy is, but I like the sound of him, so I appreciate that.
Well, hey, the hopefully we'll get into it, and you'll live up to that and more. You've led kind of global training programs for major manufacturers. You've specialized in culture, behavioral change, neurolinguistic programming, psychometric testing. That's pretty heady stuff. But I get the feeling that things weren't always that way. Kind of, what's your background? Can you give me a little bit of your history?
Yeah, I'll try and do it in a bit of a nutshell, really. But so as you mentioned, UK based, and I think straight away to get heady and deep instantly about it is my generation. So I'm 38 years old now, and my generation and the people who were teaching us to do what we do focus very much on industry, particularly where I was from, which is an ex of mining village slash town. And what they wanted you to do is to go and get what they called a proper job. So that was the thing. So we were all targeted in on doing as we were told, and we were raised by what we call the baby boomers sort of generation, who were used to this very industrial age of go out, get a proper job, work until you're in your late 60s when you've earned your retirement, and see if you can survive for a little longer to enjoy it. So I didn't fit in with that. And I had a bit of a thing where I challenged the status quo, which unfortunately the entrepreneurial revolution hadn't really kicked in the way it has now. So instead of saying, this guy's creative, he's an entrepreneur, they went, this guy's cheeky, he's hyperactive, and he's thick. So it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I did exactly that out of school. So I didn't do very well in my GCSEs, which is our sort of standardized testing here in the UK, and walked away with only English and maths in my back pocket and not particularly impressive qualifications at that. So like many of my sort of friends and colleagues and things now, what I went through is then I joined the military. So I ended up in the Royal Air Force, where I served sort of six and a half years as a technician. I was bright enough to get through the aptitude tests and for them to say, this guy is good for engineering. And it went on from there, really, and I got a proper job, so to speak. I joined the military and served my country, but then also learned to be a mechanic and an engineer. So did exactly what I was sort of bred to do, really.
You did what society kind of expected you to do, but you were just living up to kind of the expectations.
Yeah, exactly that. So it's just did exactly that. And, parents were proud, and I felt completely unfulfilled. I enjoyed being part of the military and the camaraderie, but I wasn't really helping people directly, which is something I knew I enjoyed doing. So as I started transitioning, sort of coming out of the military, I ended up finding myself more and more helping impart information onto others and teaching people how to use the modern equipment that we had at my base. And that it led from there, really, which is what got me into training. Okay. And started to pick up this training background, which I then went on to run an apprenticeship program for a global manufacturer, and then moved on to the global technical training role, which is for the global manufacturer for the mining machinery, and flying all around the world and training their people technically. But then there's an element of sort of standardization and lean in there as well. So I started learning about the principles of how to set up these departments and how to make them better. Because we assume a standard. So when I came over to Louisville, for example, did some training there with lots of local sort of Americans and Canadians, and to Australia, there was a set standard that we all generally have. But when you go to some of the lesser evolved countries, there wasn't a standard. So we had to learn to bring other people up to that. Right. And that's where that consulting edge came in. And that's when I then found myself transitioning into consulting, where I've been now for around 7 years.
Okay.
So yeah, hopefully that sort of tells the story.
Well, yeah, I mean, the part of it is you kind of went from just living up to the expectation to exceeding them, to doing what people wouldn't have expected of you. And there's a bit of a mental shift there that's involved in like, well, I can do that. I mean, part of your story is you kind of fall into a little of these things like, well, this happened, and so I made the most of that, and then this happened, and I started doing the training aspect, and I started getting to that and finding a little more fulfillment, like you talk about. Can you, when you work with coaching clients and things like that, is that what you're looking for? How much does kind of taking advantage of things that are in front of you and looking for kind of clues to fulfillment come in?
It's looking for those transferable skills, but then also what comes out in people's characteristics. And you'll see it, you obviously were doing this in a sort of video format, but in terms of people's voices and their tones, when you work with people, you hear what lights them up. Mm-hmm. And that's what I started realizing. And anyone who knew me to any extent would say, you really love doing that, don't you? And they say, doing what? Well, when you talk about training people or coaching people, you become gesticular and you become quite excited, and you can see that it's something that really fulfills you. And you say, yeah, it is. And this is when I'm working with coaching clients, I try and draw that out, which it sometimes takes a little more coaxing out of people than others, but you'll notice the sort of shifts in their voice, in their tone, and their enthusiasm about the subject. The level of detail, such as when people say, oh, I felt this and I feel this, or I can remember that experience vividly, and they start painting pictures for you, and you think that's where your enthusiasm lives, that's where your passion lives. So yeah, I think that's probably what happened to me bit by bit, amongst other things, and investing in myself greatly. It's what drew me on that journey for sure.
Yeah. When you talk about investing yourself, how have you invested in yourself beyond what you've said already? How, what else have you done that you would say, I get the feeling that you weren't particularly well read through school. Did you seek out kind of wisdom and knowledge from other people as you kind of started to reapply yourself to education? How did that kind of coalesce?
Yeah, you're quite right. I was a bright individual, but I wasn't overly intelligent, particularly not by standardized testing. It wasn't, I couldn't memorize heaps of information and then go and perform really well in a test. So my enthusiasm came back for learning when I started looking at things that interested me. And I think the single one recommendation I could make to anyone for anybody is to, well, in my case, listen to books. So audiobooks. That's what sparked me. That's what's changed my trajectory, and everything around me is starting to read personal development, business, coaching, those sorts of books. I don't tend to pick up books that I can't take a lesson from. Right. So, sort of fiction works aren't really my thing, and no criticism to them, but they're not really my thing. And I started to see different perspectives and realize there were hidden things that I had always felt that, unfortunately, I was in an echo chamber surrounded by other individuals who had the same background experience as me. So it was that, like, the whole, have you seen the crab bucket theory, where if you put one crab in a bucket, it will actually be able to climb out and escape to freedom. But if you put them all in a bucket together, as one starts to climb out, the others grab it and drag it back.
Yes.
It's really fascinating to see. I think it's a specific type of crab, which I can't remember the name, so I won't embarrass myself by stating it. But it's fascinating to see. And where I'm from, that's what it's like. So if people don't understand what it is that you do for a living and don't understand what your passion and your dream is, they'll pick on you for it.
Yes, absolutely.
You're shining a light on them, and they go, no, I'm not on that journey. I don't like that you're on that journey. Come back. Come to the pub. Don't listen to the book. Come on, watch TV with me.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty common in a lot of different societies, when there's kind of this homogeneity. Everybody's kind of similar in the same situation. That it's not jealousy per se. It's not. It's more they just don't understand it. But things that we don't understand oftentimes can be the most frightening things to us. It's that somebody. My dad went through this a little bit. He's from a smaller town in the southeastern part of the United States, and he was one of the first kind of his family group to really get out of the area, and he moved across the country to Los Angeles. So that there was kind of this resentment that because people didn't understand it, why would you leave your home, where your family's from, all those kinds of things, and not necessarily maliciously. I mean, it was somewhat unconscious, like you say. It's like no, screw that thing about going, listening to the book. Come down to the pub, have a pint. Let's do it. What's interesting to me also is that you found what worked for you, which was listening to books. I'm not big on reading, but listening to books is the way that I can get the most value the fastest. And that's what works for you. So many people probably look at books and go, I'm a slow reader. I personally am a slow reader, right? It takes me forever, partially because I get into reading every word, and I also write. So I'm kind of obsessed with language and the way that people turn phrases and put things together. So it takes me forever to get through something. And because it takes me so long, I don't even like to pick up a book half the time because I know it's going to be such an investment. Whereas, again, audiobooks may be the secret, and I probably should get an audiobook sponsor on this show sometime soon to get into that. What do you have any books that you really remember kind of crystallizing your philosophy or a change in thought?
Yeah, there are several that my go-tos, and I mean I've got hundreds of books in my Audible library, and I've listened to a few of them over and over again. The classics, some of the classic ones, which a lot of people's go-tos, are Dale Carnegie, his books. So How to Win Friends and Influence People, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. They're two great books. They were really my starter sort of books that I went, wow, this is fantastic. Just a different way of thinking, dealing with things. Yes. Another one that I really, really enjoy and have taken some great things from that are useful in the business world is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Okay.
Ex-FBI negotiator. Some fantastic techniques and tips. And then I like a lot of the military guys. So you've got You Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, Extreme Ownership and Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, ex-Navy SEAL officers. So just, some fantastic, real mixed bag of things, but just some amazing books that really have sort of taught me a lot of lessons that I've applied things in life. There's some more fun ones, and definitely some of the more niche topics like law of attraction, which, I'd love to hear what your sort of take and thoughts on law of attraction. It splits our world in half on personal development. It really does. So there's a couple of books around that. I'm trying to coerce myself into it I want to be a believer. Yeah. But it's not the easiest.
Yeah. Well, I struggle a lot with anything. I mean, I obviously, I think a lot of people do. Anything that challenges your existing belief, that to be open to new information. And I think that's a little bit of why, as people advance in their careers, whether it's, take doctors, for instance, that statistically, in some cases, you're better off having a younger doctor who's learned the latest information than an older doctor who's had access to the latest information, but they kind of get set in the way that they do things, and they don't always go to the newest, latest, greatest technique or follow the latest research that says, say, for instance, I read that rest, ice, compression, and elevation, right, is the prescription that they oftentimes give for a lot of injuries. Rest, ice, compression, elevation. And for sports injuries and things like that, they're now saying a meta-analysis of the research shows that ice actually can slow down the healing process. It helps alleviate swelling, but that it actually can take a little bit longer if you repeatedly ice a wound to do it. So the jury's out on that, right? Long-held research, long-held belief, but now there's some things challenging whether it's as important, say, as we had placed a benefit on it. And any of that, you can imagine that sports medicine doctor or the trainer or whomever looking at these kinds of things and going, no, you got to ice. that's always worked for me. And you go, but has it? In your anecdotal evidence, I mean, what evidence do you have that? Because have you done a double-blind study where you've isolated between your patients and you've iced some and not others and all those kinds of things? But part of the, I mean, I'm big on the idea that it's important to try and live up to your full potential. That a lot of the time we shortchange ourselves, and I don't know whether it's fear or just perhaps even lack of wherewithal, but there's some hang up, some sticking that keeps us from doing, and maybe we don't even know that it's possible, right? Like you're working with coaching clients to help them realize that bigger and better things are possible. But what would you say kind of is the biggest hurdle in your coaching clients to getting them to realize their potential? What's the roadblock?
It's that mindset shift. It's the generic term we use. It's winning at the mental game, which is one of my big focuses, because we are capable of so much more than we allow ourselves to be, and it's nearly all of it is in your head. Obviously, there are physicality issues. But actually, I did an interesting experiment on myself, which I absolutely do not recommend to anybody. Okay. It's that with very, very little training, I decided to sign up for a 10K Spartan race. So it was a trail running race, 10 kilometers through woods, hills, forest, all sorts of crazy things with next to no training. The reason for it, besides being stupid, is that I wanted to see what I was capable of. So I wanted to see if my body would actually, and my mind, see who would win out first. Mm-hmm. Because your mind tends to give out before your body does. And you hear all these crazy stories about people being able to lift the front end of a car to rescue their loved ones and things like that. And it's these really interesting things, like was alluded to in the film Limitless and things like that, that actually we are only using a very small amount of our potential, right? Mentally, physically. And I did the race. I wasn't very fast. I certainly didn't look very nice at the end of it or feel very nice. But mentally, I actually burst through it and all the way around saying, your body's going to give in a minute. You know, you're not trained for this. And I just kept going and I never stopped running. Right. And it was that realization. And that's what I try and unlock for my clients. And it's one of the presuppositions of the NLP practitioner. There's 10 presuppositions. This is one of my favorite ones. It's called the map is not the territory. Okay. So a little bit along what you were just saying there about people sort of being stuck in confirmation bias and things on their learned material. So I know this to be true. So everything will point to the fact that it absolutely is, because I know it to be true. So I look for evidence that proves that. And that's the concept behind the map is not the territory, and that we can only take in, I'm not going to throw statistics because they change all the time, but basically there's a very limited amount of information that we can take in at one point. Mm-hmm. And our brains choose to pass some over to the subconscious, perform some deletions / ignore things, and then take into our consciousness things that are the most important to us or danger to us. And depending on what your values are and what is important to you and the way you think is what you'll be presented with as information. And I'll give you a very, very true example of this. And it's called the new car phenomenon, which I absolutely love. So when you bought your last car, when you were first looking at the types of cars there were, and you finally went, yes, that is the vehicle that I want. So mine was an Audi Q3. I said, yep, that's the vehicle we want. Suddenly, as if by magic, they were everywhere. Yes. Everywhere I looked, I thought, everyone's got one of these. Now, that's not divine intervention, you know, as much as there is ultimate power somewhere, I'm sure. Nobody's suddenly created tens of thousands of these cars on the road just for me to see. It's the fact that I've rewired my brain to say, I want to see Audi Q3s now. They are important to me. Right. That's what I want. So that's what my brain then looked for. And it's fascinating. If you ever work with a new client or a new firm, you suddenly see that firm's brand or logo in places and things like that. And a long way around answering your question is, when you remap people, when you rewire their brains and actually show them what the potential is when they go, wow, I did that. I'm capable of that. I'm not trapped in here. And this story that I've told myself for years that I can't possibly succeed at X, or I can't do this or that, is all in my head. It's, you know, it's a limiting belief that I've actually created because of a past experience. It's mental. It's not actually a physical block. It's not something that's there.
Right.
And that when that penny drops, it's an absolutely magical moment. And people are like, I'm going to go and do it now. And they just leave.
Well, hey, I admire. Hey, get up, stand up, let's go. Come on, let's
absolutely
get out and get on with it. So, I mean, what would you say is the kind of biggest fallacy in your industry that it seems like everybody buys into, but that's just utter hogwash, BS? You know, one of those popular philosophies that everybody's trying to follow that's like, this is actually total bull.
This is my favorite one. Fake it till you make it.
All right.
Because the actual just using that terminology and thinking about something in that way, you riddle yourself, and I've met lots of individuals like it, you riddle yourself with the imposter syndrome because you're living up to that fallacy of I'm faking this. And I think it's changing that mindset and changing that aspersion that you are faking something, and actually you're starting off on that journey.
Right.
And yes, sometimes you can't be completely transparent of how early on into a journey you are, particularly if you're trying to go for a job or anything like that. But actually, you can mentally give yourself goals and you can do visualization. So one of the exercises I do with coaching clients is I get them, not one person per se, but it's almost build a committee of people that make up the person you want to be. So if, say, I want to have the charisma of, say, Tony Robbins or something like that on stage, I'm not going to pretend to be Tony Robbins. What I'm going to do is look at the way he holds himself and do almost, to use my consulting side, a skills gap analysis to say, what can he do that I can't? And let me learn those lessons and make up for it. If I pretend to be him from day dot, I'm going to become very disenchanted very quickly and feel inadequate.
Yep.
Whereas if I acknowledge I'm on this journey, I'm way behind Tony, but I'm on a journey here. And if I keep trying to reverse engineer the things that he does, but take my own path to get there, then great, that's progressive. Whereas telling yourself you're already there and pretending until someone catches you out is recipe for disaster, I think.
For sure. Well, part of the thing for me is imposter syndrome is huge. It's more common than we'd like to believe, and in a lot of different areas. And people can be confident, self-confident, whatever, in certain areas and not have that in others and feel like a complete imposter. Someday somebody's going to figure out, I don't actually know what I'm doing and I'm just trying to fake it and I still haven't made it and all of those things. And what the honest, I go back to Martin Seligman's learned optimism, where people who seemed to be able to get through negative situations they saw things as specific and time-bound. They wouldn't go, I'm a bad person, which is just overly general, or I'm faking it. They go, I don't know that thing yet. So in those kinds of statements, you find, okay, it's very specific. I am not good at running a 10K yet. So I could be, I can get there if I want to. It's very specific, and it's not, I'm not athletic. I'm not whatever. And just reframing a little bit, like you talk about mindset, is huge in just seeing how and what you could do. So the converse of all that is what would you say the most underrated concept is that everybody overlooks? Is there something that just, I mean, it could be simple, like we talked about mindset, but is there something just, it seems like so many of your clients are ignoring that would just be hugely valuable?
It's a generalization, but it's something that it comes from my training background is everything is teachable. And that's not just as in skills, because obviously there are physical limitations.
Right.
Yeah. I'm probably not ever going to play in the NBA. With the best mindset in the world,
Right.
probably never going to play, at 5'10" and slightly overweight. The camera adds 10 pounds, of course, and there's a camera there and I'm there. So, but I'm probably never going to play in the NBA.
Right.
But in terms of everything being teachable, I wasn't a coach. I wasn't a Big Four consultant. I wasn't born a mechanic. And the same, it goes all the way back to your core beliefs, such as, with the big discussions. And one of the great videos that I watched, it was a really short YouTube clip from a lady, the name evades me, but she said that like racism, she was talking and putting to bed the subject of racism, that people aren't born racist. Yeah, everything is learned behavior.
Right.
And that means everything we learn, we can unlearn, and we can actually learn new skills, new mindsets, new values and everything. And some things are harder wired into us than others. But if we picture ourselves like a computer where you've got your random access memory and your read-only memory, so your RAM and your ROM, well, your read-only memory is actually down to some very, very basic things. So, the way that your organs function, the way that your body heals itself, the things that it learns to do. The things that it can do without us even thinking about it. Everything else, the way we walk, the way we act, the way we hold ourselves, our accents, our reflections, everything are all learned behaviors. And they can all be re-taught and rewired, which is really fascinating. That's the concept of NLP. It really fascinates me.
So can you go into a little bit more about NLP? Because I'm kind of, I did a little research before we got on the call. It seems like the key to unlocking a lot of our potential. Can you just give me a little more background on that?
Of course. So the idea is that traditional psychology looks backwards to see what created issues in the first place, and it tries to unpick them and basically make people come to terms with trauma and things that happen to them. Now, NLP, there are far greater practitioners out there than myself, but NLP isn't generally used for severe trauma. It's more for habit forming, mild phobias, behaviors, habits, anything like that. And the idea behind NLP, a little bit extending on what I've just said there, and the fact that everything that we picked up, we've learned. And so it means that anything that we've learned and any values that we hold and beliefs we have about ourselves, we can retrain them. Mm-hmm. So, Tony, again, a fascinating. I keep pulling him out. I mean, there's another good NLP practitioner, a guy called Paul McKenna, who was on telly in the UK. I don't know whether he was ever really made it out in the States, which is why I use Tony Robbins a lot, because he's probably one of the most famous NLP practitioners beyond Richard Bandler, who created it and does a lot of speaking on it. And you can find loads of talks from him. But Tony actually cured someone of a stammer within, I think it was an 8-minute session with someone, because it actually, now obviously there are medical things that cause stammers, but in most cases, a stammer or stutter is put there from a psychological block that someone has said, come on, spit it out, stop, you're stuttering your words, come on. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that I stammer when I talk, and it almost trains the brain and it becomes part of your vocabulary. And actually anyone that stammers when they talk, but not when they sing, means it's a psychological thing, not through trauma or brain damage. So anything like that, fears and phobias, can be rewritten. And what the NLP practitioner tends to do is they speak to the person and they get them to explain what these scenarios or situations are. So say, for example, it's, I want to build some confidence.
Yep.
I would say, great. So you want to be confident. And we make that goal very, very specific. I want to be confident when I'm in public. I want to be confident when I'm speaking to strangers. Great. And what we do is we unpick all of the baggage and all of the negative messages that a person has in their mind as to why they can't do that right now. And almost catastrophize with them when they say, well, so what will happen? They go, I could just completely lose my words. You say, oh my God, yeah, that'd be awful. So what would happen then? Well, I wouldn't be able to talk. And what would happen? Not a lot, really.
Right. I wouldn't talk.
Okay. So what do you think the person would think? probably not be that upset by
Right.
it. Okay. So has there ever been an instance where you spoke to someone and it's been okay? Well, yeah, I speak all the time at work. Well, how's that different? Well, because it's a technical subject. I know it quite well. Okay. Well, do you know about yourself? Yeah. Well, then you could talk about yourself too. And it's breaking down those little barriers and those little stories and that negative inner vocabulary we have. It's our inner guard. When we go to speak to someone, they go, "Oh my God, don't try and talk to that person. Look what's going to happen to you. The ground is going to fall in and swallow me up.
The whole world is going to end."
Yeah, the dinosaurs will be back. And you think, actually, that's probably not going to happen. So let's get to terms with the worst case scenario, and it's not that bad if that does happen. So let's just give it a try.
Right.
And you're rewriting fresh messages over the top. So NLP is about looking forward and rewriting and reprogramming the mind rather than trying to revert back, unpick it and find the bugs. It's about replacing the programming, basically.
Well, programming is so huge. And the stories that we tell, we've talked a little bit about it earlier in the interview about false beliefs and things that people hold on to for no reason, just because they've been telling themselves that narrative their entire life or for quite some time, and just think that that's how things are. You do you. If you want it, if you don't want to change, fine. But if you're here and you want, you go, but actually I'd like to have a relationship with more than my cat. I'd like to be more confident at work, and I know I'm worth more. Okay, so now we want to make a change. Let's just figure out how to do that. What's the kind of biggest challenge for you growing your coaching practice?
It's overcoming that belief within myself, actually, is that, it's one thing doing it, and it's another thing actually taking other people through that journey. And I think that's the thing is, that imposter syndrome we spoke about is that you might face someone and go, I don't know how to help that person. And it's tough. And it's always, you sit there and with bated breath when you say, how can I help you today? What can we do for you and get out of this session for you? And I sit with bated breath, waiting for them to present me with something that I have no idea how to overcome. And it actually hasn't happened yet.
Right.
The only thing that tends to happen is certain clients that won't actually put into action the things that they say they will. And unfortunately, that's where your locus of control comes in. And you have to say, I can't make you do this. You keep coming back to me. We keep talking, but unless you go and take these actions away and implement them, and it's in my coaching contract when people agree to be coached by me, is that this is done by you. I am here to draw out and pull out ideas and thoughts and give you some tools and techniques, but ultimately your journey is absolutely in your hands. Right. And if you don't go back and implement these things, and you may have had it, so if you've seen something on TV or watched a documentary or a video or listened to a podcast and thought, I'm fired up, I'm really fired up, I'm going to go and do that, and I'm going to go and do it. Oh, what's that YouTube video? And you don't do it, and then you go, see, that probably would have worked if I've actually done something about it.
I think there is a component probably in coaching and even psychotherapy and a lot of other things where people actually don't make the leap between. They just want to complain. They just want to kind of revel in what's happening and talk with somebody about it instead of actually doing anything about it. And in their mind, they are doing something about it, except they're not, right? It's like you can convince yourself that by planning your world domination, that you are moving toward world domination. But if you don't take a single action toward that goal beyond the thought, then it's stillborn.
I think a point that I use within coaching actually to that point, and it's one of my big, the powerful questions that we use. And I always say, if you didn't quit and you carried on your actions, where would you be a year from now? And it's thinking about the small, thinking about the compounding effect. And I usually discuss this up to that question. And that's one of my favorite ones, because if I went to the gym every day or every other day between now and this time next year, what would I look like then? And it's taking that what you just said into consideration, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And that's such a powerful thing. We oftentimes discount gradual progress. I think we're all impatient. I certainly am. I want things now. I have the perfect body, and I want to be thin, and I want the great relationship and a beautiful car and vacations all over the world and all those things. And you go, but it's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. Just going to the gym once tomorrow is not enough. Going for a year, and again, gradual progress, day to day, you're not going to notice the difference. You have to take a larger sample size. You have to look from here to a year from now, or 3 months from now, or whatever, and then compare, and then make your decision on the margin, because you're too close to it. You haven't gotten the 30,000 foot view or whatever it takes to actually make an educated decision about what you're doing. Chris, this has been fantastic. If you want to know more about Chris, you can find him at redmilecoaching.com. Links will be in the description. Thank you guys so much for joining me. And until next time, I'm Andrew Wallace, and we don't have a problem. We've got an opportunity.